Hello, everyone. I'm excited to present this research that I'm doing in collaboration with a couple different graduate student co-authors, including Mackenzie Preston, who you'll hear from later today, as part of the PhD project research collaboration. This project came out of this. So, as we all know, in summer of 2020, when everyone started to care about racism, there was a lot more, along with that care about racism and this heightened societal attention to racism, there was also heightened calls for allyship. And this can be seen in the HBR and growth in the number of articles that are on the topic, but also a lot of organizations are now folding allyship training into their DEI efforts. And so, as it has been said and talked about in this room earlier today, allyship is formally defined as advantaged groups engaging in committed action to improve the treatment and status of disadvantaged groups. But whether it's talking about men as allies for women, heterosexual individuals as allies for LGBTQ individuals, or white people as allies for racial minorities and racial justice, there tends to be this idea that in order to be an ally, you have to be a member of a dominant social identity group. So for racial justice, you have to be white. And yet we know that a lot of times the people who are really crafting programs to remove inequities are members of other marginalized groups. And so in this case, we're focused on racial minorities. So the question is, can a racial minority be seen as an effective ally for racial justice? It has been said multiple times in the room today that racial minorities can be allies, but what are the perceptions of them when they engage in these behaviors? Existing research would say, no, they are not seen as effective allies or as effective as a white person. Because in general, racial minorities are penalized for engaging in DEI behaviors, and they're seen as more self-interested. And yet, the majority of people who are DEI managers and tasked with, in their formal roles, engaging in allyship type behaviors are non-white. So in this paper, centered on racial minority leaders in organizations, we argue and we take a finer grain approach in looking at this allyship. And we're looking in this case at same-race allyship versus cross-race allyship. So same-race allyship is a racial minority who is engaging in behaviors to remove inequities for members of their own group versus another group. And when you think of it in this way, you can see that the same-race allyship would actually be the problematic context in which negative perceptions may arise. In particular, we focus on this negative perception of in-group favoritism, or you're unfairly advantaging your group. And in doing so, this leads to lower perceptions of allyship effectiveness that has downstream consequences of lower leader effectiveness and employees' own support for the racial equity effort. Most importantly, in this paper, we identify a moderator or something that can be done to reduce these negative effects. So I'm going to show you data from 3 studies, and I'm going to get through it in 5 minutes. So in the first study, we recruited participants to tell us about times in their own organizations where a racial minority leader has engaged in either cross-race or same-race allyship. We defined it for them and gave them examples. They wrote out these examples, and those examples were actually really illuminating. And we found support for this first hypothesis such that same-race allyship was related to significantly higher levels of in-group favoritism, and there was a significant indirect effect of that heightened in-group favoritism to lower perceptions that this racial minority leader was indeed an effective allyship. In the next study, we presented participants with vignettes where a leader who was either Asian or Black was engaging in either same-race or cross-race allyship, and again, we found these heightened perceptions of in-group favoritism when same-race allyship occurred, but importantly, it wasn't different between the Black leader or the Asian leader. So when they were advocating for their own group, they were seen as being higher in group favoritism. And this led to ultimately lower levels of leadership effectiveness and lower participants saying that they wouldn't really support this racial equity effort in the same way when it was directed towards another marginalized racial group. Lastly, in our final experiment, when we looked at this moderated effect, we looked at allyship framing. And so with this allyship framing, we looked at whether you could highlight the contributions of other employees and their ideas in your allyship by saying, a lot of people have brought this to my attention, and I am now raising this as an idea that we could do to help an underrepresented group. And we found that this significantly reduced perceptions of in-group favoritism, and the index to the moderated mediation all the way through was significant for both DVs, which means it also reduced the negative effects on leader effectiveness and employee support for racial equity. So what does this mean? It means that a lot of people in this room today were right, that if you are a member of a marginalized racial group or a marginalized identity group, you can be seen as an effective ally. And our paper also provides a pathway forward for when you are in positions where you need to advocate for your own group to help those that are still at lower levels of an organizational hierarchy and reduce the negative effects of that behavior. Thank you.